Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Sean, and I'm delighted you are joining us for today's ESBC community webinar. Today I'm joined by Michael, Jakub from Resco, and Scott from Microsoft, who will cover powerful tools for app makers, how to source and use PCF controls. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in on a conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is @ESBC_community and our hashtag is #ESBC24. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which is updated with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar. Entra Apps 101. Secure yourself against the next midnight blizzard attack with Rob and Alberto. This webinar will take place Wednesday, 22nd of January at 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. CET. For more information on this webinar, please check out www.sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Double the impact of your learning with our 2-for-1 offer at ESPC. It's an incredibly exciting time in the Microsoft 365 space, and we're bringing world-leading experts to share insights on how you can help your organization and colleagues work smarter than ever before. Register on 22nd of January, and you can bring a colleague along for free with our exclusive 2-for-1 deal at www.sharepointeurope.com/ESPC 2-for-1 offer. The early bird catches the first worm. Join us in Vienna from 16th to 19th of June 2025 for EPPC. The Super Early Bird Sale is live, offering you a chance to save big on tickets and kick off 2025 with purpose, passion, and a plan. Learn from experts in Power Platform, Power BI, Power Apps, Copilot Studio, and Dynamics 365. Stay ahead with the latest trends and tools and network with industry leaders and peers. Secure tickets at www.sharepointeurope.com/European Power Platform Conference pricing. Exciting news, #FabCon Europe tickets will officially go on sale in mid-January. Be among the first to secure your spot by registering your interest now. Early registration gives you exclusive early sale access and a special discount code to make the experience even better. Don't miss out, visit www.sharepointeurope.com/European Microsoft Fabric Community Conference. After the webinar, we'll have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you might have into the questions box. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it's available. And now, I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenters, Michael, Scott, and Jakub. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, for introduction. Just one check question. Can you hear us clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you for introduction and the general information. And thank you for happening this. And thank you, gentlemen, for making this happen. Thank you, ESPC, and thank you, especially Scott, that you find time to prepare for this webinar. My expectations today are that we will have a nice discussion. We have also a slide deck prepared that is mostly about keeping the topics aligned, but it will be also about the discussion. We have some thoughts that we want to discuss. We have some questions that we will use to challenge the discussion between me, Jakub, and Scott. Topics for today, we have like 6 main topics. First one is a brief introduction about Power App Component Framework, just to briefly touch what is the framework about and what it allows you. Then we have a topic about how PCF delivers value across the Power Platform. We have another topic that we will discuss that is a PCF controls in the real life, about the real use cases and the usage of the PCF framework and components across the Power Platform. Scott will provide us some technical insights and advanced development of the PCF controls. We have also some latest news from Microsoft, from Scott, regarding the Power Platform and the PCF framework. And at the end, we will speak about how we approach the PCF controls in Resco that we call power controls or power components that you can use. And we want to make components as a solution. So these are like main topics that we want to discuss today. We will also have time for the questions. Sean, maybe you can give us information about how long it will take, how much time we can manage for the questions at the end.
Yeah, so we normally have about 5 to 10 minutes at the end for questions. So
Okay,
keep it around an hour, but if you want to go over the hour, that's up to you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we can directly jump to the topics. I will start with the first topic, which is the introduction of the Power Apps Component Framework. I think all of you know it, but it's good to remind what framework is, especially what is Power App Component Framework. This framework by Microsoft allows developers to create custom reusable interactive components for the model-driven and canvas applications that allows you to enhance functionality of the Power Platform. So it is something that allows you to provide more features to the Power Platform that are not there, but you want to provide it, especially if you are developing or building or making applications over Power Platform, no matter if it's model-driven application, canvas, or page. And for sure, each framework provides you some, let's say, some frames and also some freedom what you can deliver. So there are like 4 main pillars according to the framework itself. So the freedom is represented by the customizable business and the logic that you can bring to the Power Platform. Of course, you need to have some frame where you can move within the framework. So we have like standardized secure development. So you need to use some best patterns and also provide the components that are secure. This is something that you should keep in mind if you're using the framework. Framework also provides you the way how you can iterate with your components. So it means that each component has its own version. You can make dependencies between components and solutions and all these other stuff. So they're already included in the Power Platform. And for sure, to cover the interoperability between your component and what you do, you should have something like API or connection within your component and other stuff in the Power Platform. So this is something what is included in the framework, and we will speak about all these areas today. So we can jump to the second point, which is how PCF delivers value across the Power Platform. And as you know, there are like 3 main types of applications that you can start to build on the Power Platform. It can be the Canvas application, model-driven app, or Power Page. And each has its own motivation or the way how you can use it. The Canvas application is more about the UI and UX driven approach, where you can build a pixel perfect nice application, no matter where your model or data or files are stored. So it can be over SharePoint, over Excel files, whatever else. But you are more concentrated on how the application should look like. The second one, the model-driven application, is really frequently used for the internal processes in the organization. So we have like a model-driven approach where you know what kind of data you would like to store, what information would you collect, and you have the data model represented in the Dataverse. And the application can be built over the data structure. So it means that your application is driven by your data model. That's the reason why it calls model-driven application. And Power Pages allows you to create or provide the way how to access Dataverse data through the application for the third parties like end users or clients. So there are like different approaches that you can choose. So you have this flexibility, and the Power Platform and the Power App Component Framework allows you to use the component across all Power Platform, no matter which type of application did you choose. Maybe we can also discuss some examples. Jakub, you can cover it, for example.
Yeah, just to give a little break to Michael. And before we wrap up this talking part, we move to conversation. Previous slide was quite loaded, was not for audience to read. It was just mostly to specify some of the typical requirements that we answer with each of these pillars. I know, well, like with the Power Platform, like almost every single person you ask has a different favorite feature they see in each of these pillars, or that represents these pillars for them. This next slide is just to finish the point that we're trying to make, that the PCF that we want to talk about, that we believe is so important, delivers value across the board. And here you can see some of examples. I mean, we try to paint the picture of 3 use cases for each of the pillars, but also we're trying to paint a picture with 1 component for each of these. These are on one hand just examples, so we can imagine how it can look like, the requirement you're trying to answer with the PCF component. On the other end, it's not just the example, because for example, the one in the middle, timeline visualization control, is something that Resco is actually working on right now. So kind of like connecting theory with the real world. So this is just to wrap up the introduction, the bit of a theory. I know that we're moving from very beginner approach to this topic to more advanced arguments. But just to wrap up the talking part, let's switch to the actual thought that we can discuss after this, theoretical part. So, Michael, first thought that we prepared, and now finally we will let Scott to say something. But open this up. You have a lot of conversation. I mean, I'm in the Power Platform world for a couple of years, but I joined PCF topic literally last month. For you, you've been already working on with many partners, with many customers on their components. Give us some insights about your conversation and try to frame it in this thought that we prepared.
Yeah, there are like, when I had discussions with the various partners, and most of them, they are system integrators, so they use Power Platform for delivering applications and solutions for their clients. They cover some needs with the native components. Some of them, some of the use cases they're covering with the open source that they adjust, and a lot of partners are trying to hack the potential of the model-driven applications that they are providing. Let's say model-driven component or component that is for model-driven application, just wrapping the web components. And this is the question also for Scott, like why to use like PCF control in model-driven application? Because like a lot of developers are approaching the web components as that can be really easily used in a Power Platform in the iframe or in the web resource.
Hi, Jakub. Hi, Michael. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to kind of including me in this conversation. It's a topic that's really close to my heart, and of course, PCF in model-driven apps is the original PCF. It's like it goes back for a long time now. I mean, I think probably, goodness me, over 5 years when it was first started. I first started to use it, and I actually created a course like in the early days when it was first introduced for model-driven apps. And so I love that slide that you presented with the 3 kind of pillars, if you like, the Canvas app, model-driven apps, and Power Pages. But if we were to put it into chronological order, right, you'd put model-driven apps actually on the left, and then it was introduced into Canvas apps, and then it was introduced to the Power Pages. So it's a PCF Power Apps component framework, or code components as they're often referred to, has sort of started in the model-driven apps and then sort of spread throughout the Power Platform. And why would you use them? Because I often joke, and we were joking about this yesterday, weren't we? It was like my first rule of PCF is don't use a PCF. which always sounds kind of a bit silly, really, because I love talking about PCFs and I love building them and I love using them. But I think the key here is that model-driven apps is an incredibly powerful app framework that allows you to do things very, very quickly, like you mentioned earlier, metadata-driven, forms over data, very quickly create like advanced security models, ways of interacting with your data very quickly to be able to navigate through, create an app where you've got complex layouts, very consistent dashboards, so many different features, filtering, searching. And yeah, that slide, yeah, exactly. So you can use PCFs in so many different places in model-driven apps, but why would you do that? Because it's such a rich environment. And I think my jokingly don't use the first rule of PCF is don't use PCF is really what that translates into is see how far you can possibly get with the native functionality that you get in Power Apps and in Power Pages. Push it as far as you possibly can. And then the reasons that you'd use PCF is to then say, well, there is a very high value use case that we have that perhaps users are using something like a form over and over and over again, many times a day, compared to maybe some other administrative factors in model-driven apps. They might be navigating to a view and then clicking on opening a record and then editing a field and then saving it and then moving on. And they might do that, every once in a while. But then there might be one area in your app where you're editing data, you're updating data, or you're visualizing data regularly, like multiple times a day, and the efficiency of using that user interface is key, because the more efficient it is, the more effective it is, the quicker it's going to be, and then the better the user experience is going to be. People are going to love the app more. Like we've all used like time sheeting applications. Everyone loves to complain about time sheeting applications, right? It's like, oh, because I've got to do it every day or every week, and it's like a big bind. But if you can have a user interface where users love it because it's so easy to use, then it means your user adoption is going to be greater, and people are going to have a nicer day, and they're going to have more time to do other things and more higher value things. So I think that for me is really the key thing to answer that question. Is like, why would you use a PCF and model driven? It's where there is a high value piece of user interface that gets used many times, and you want to make a nice environment, user interface for people to love. You want to make it more efficient, you want to make it cute, quicker, and you can't do that using the out-of-the-box functionality that you would use it in the configuring low code. And then the sky's the limit, right? Because you can just, like in all of these different places, you can customize a dashboard component to have a custom user interface. You can actually, even if you want to, use the standard grids that you get with model-driven apps in forms and on home pages, subgrids. And you can even customize individual cells inside that. So you might want to show an image or something like that in an individual cell. So you don't have to replace the whole grid. You just want to replace one cell. And so there's many different places that we can just augment and enhance that user interface. And the great thing is that the users don't know any different, right? They think it's part of model-driven apps. I think that's the real power of PCF, which is beyond what we used to have. Like if we wind back before PCF, then really the only way we could do this was like embed web resources like in iframes, and there was always a jarring difference between the user interface that you would get that you out of the box and then your own custom user interface. And I a long time back, many years ago, I built a user interface framework called Sparkle XRM, which was about trying to make your custom web resources look the same as the out of the box user interface. So that there was so much you had to do, but with PCF, that job is so much easier, and you can just make things look native.
Yeah, thank you. So just one thought. I like to work on something with Scott because he has a passion about PCF, and I really like how he speaks about PCF in general. So thank you, Scott, for this. Yeah, exactly. It is about the reusability and also the thought that each component can be something like a small part of or product that you can iteratively improve and spread across the application, add more features. And this is also something what we think about for each component, that the flexibility can be various, and when we develop something, it is really nice to see how various system integrators think about the possibility of usage of the component. So we have like a constant feedback about how the component can be used in various cases on various entities in various scenarios, and each component can be really like Scott mentioned, that the sky is the limit on each component. Like you can create the really simple component, for example, Kanban board, but you can use it for various use cases, for a task management, for assignment management, or opportunity management. You can create the opportunity pipeline and so on. So this is exactly how the component can be reused and can be iteratively improved as a part of your application. And this is also the part of our second thought that I also write down on the next slide, that if you are thinking about the component, or you identify your customer requested something what is not available on the Power Platform and you would like to deliver it, you have a couple of options. First one is that you will develop by your own. So you will develop your own components and add what is missing on the Power Platform. And obviously you will go to Google and or maybe ask ChatGPT if there is already something existing that you can use, or you will ask somebody else who is maybe more into that area, that they can develop it for you as a third-party solution. And this is a bit dilemma, or maybe not. This is something what we can also discuss, because when I was in the discussion with the various system integrators, they said, yes, we have a lot of components. We deliver it, we put it somewhere, we don't document it too much, we deliver it to the client. We have at least something like a library. We don't know how many components are there, but we at least have something, but we are not utilizing it or iterating with other clients that we can deliver the same value for more clients. And what do you guys think? What is the ideal way, in which case does it make sense to use the first-party components, and in which makes sense to use the third party? Because as we discuss, component is something like an iceberg. So you have the use case, for example, you have the problem that should be solved, that there should be a component that allows you to upload file. That is a simple request, but what is behind of this is quite complex. Like, what do you think when it makes sense to use the first-party components, when to take a look on the open source, and when third-party? Who would like to take this question first?
So component, it's a good word, and we use component a lot, don't we? And it often gets sort of the implication of reusability, because a component, we can then use it again and again and again. And so I've got quite an old car. It's a Ford Explorer, and we had it serviced recently, and they were sort of talking about, like, hey, well, you're going to need to replace this, and you need to replace this. And one of the sort of advantages of getting a car, which is sort of like a common car, is that you can get components, parts for it, which are not necessarily always going to be built by, provided by Ford in this case. But I have a friend who has a Porsche, actually, and then they were saying, it's like, well, if you have to service your Porsche and you need a part, you're going to have to get that part from Porsche. And it's like, because otherwise no one else is going to make the same part, and also it'll devalue the car. And the thing about components is, like, the more times you use them, so like Ford, if they create like a component that you're going to be using many, many different cars, every time there is a new car and then use that component, it's kind of adding to the cost of keeping that component going, because manufacturing the component, because you've got to test to make sure it still works. Every time you build, you have a new factory, or you change your fabrication process or something like that, you've still got to make sure that that component that you're producing works on all of the previous cars that you've used that component in. Otherwise someone's going to take that component and say, oh, well, I need a part A, B, C, and they're going to put it, and it's not going to work because the tolerances are not quite the same, or whatever it might be. And I think that's the thing about reusability, is that every time you reuse something, it introduces an additional cost on something. So if you're going to build a component that's reusable, then you have to take on that responsibility of making sure that you're going to make sure you test it every time, anything changes, anything that's affecting that component, you've got to make sure you're going to retest every single place. So I think that's what really, for me, is one of this, you use the dilemma, and I think that's a very good word for it. And as you mentioned, you know, there are people who don't reuse things because of the cost involved in going back in testing on everywhere it's used. So rather than reuse, they just kind of create a new version of it, and it's just for that specific implementation. Now, we just take for granted when first party, so when we talk about first party, it's like the Microsoft PCF components. So Microsoft create a lot of PCF components that they kind of give as part of the Power Platform, or if you're using Dynamics 365 service or sales, you know, there's lots of PCF components you get from them. And so if you're using those components, then Microsoft obviously do the testing for you, and so you don't have to worry about that. You just reuse it, and you know, with each version, you assume that it's going to carry on working. And so yeah, it is the tip of the iceberg, like you said, Michael. It's like, well, we just look at what we get there. Now, as if you're going to use an open source, then you have to then consider about everything below the surface, like everything, you know, and it's like so many different testing on with updates, performance, security vulnerabilities, and maybe, you know, building it, having a pipeline to version, deployment, all of these complicated things you have to worry. So that huge iceberg is all of your responsibility. And then third party, well, actually, that's the great thing, is just you're sort of giving someone else the responsibility. You worry only about the tip of the iceberg, and you're giving somebody else. You know that there's things that you need to do, but you're giving someone else that responsibility. So that's the dilemma. It's like, you know, where do you sit in this kind of in this spectrum of different amounts of ownership that you're going to have to take? And then, of course, if you do use an open source, or you build your own, then you're going to have to handle all of the testing, and if you're going to reuse it on many different projects, you're going to have to manage regression testing. So it is a dilemma, and it is hard. But I think the key is that it's important to understand the implication, the total cost of ownership. I think that's why we're here, right? That's why we're talking about this, and that's why we're having this conversation, so that everyone is aware that there is that tip of the iceberg, and there's all that stuff underneath that you really do need to know about.
Yeah, you know, this is actually a very cool thing about this initiative, because I remember, I think it was 2 months before Resco actually first time officially mentioned that we're entering the PCF world. The cool thing about this initiative is that this is not something like unknown or new. Like, this is not a brand new product that we're introducing to the world. Like you said, it's been around for like 5 years, but we're introducing a different layer to it, so you can use it more freely, even in the enterprise sector. And I remember, like I said, this conversation even a month before it was even released or announced by Resco. I talked to my friend, and he works for one of the big 4 companies, and he's a big guy for business applications there, solution architect, and we talked about their libraries. And technically what they have is not even like a library, it's more like a window shopping, because the nature of consultancy business, that, you know, everything you do has to be paid by a customer. So you're never gonna create extra documentation for something that is beyond the use case that you're working on. You're never gonna do all of that extra work. So he told me, like, we have huge library of components, but we never actually use them. We use them for presentation to show customer that we have something like what they're asking for, but when customers actually asking for it, we're going to create it from scratch once again, because that particular use case we used it for initially was not really documented, it was different, and all the work they would have to do to kind of adjust that existing component to a new project would be way more expensive. So that was kind of funny thing about it. Like, we're not introducing no new science, or as they say, is not rocket surgery, what we're doing right here. It's just we're looking below the water when it's come to the iceberg. So that is actually a nice thing about this initiative.
Yeah, I really like the philosophical layer on top of this. Like we are living in the age where you're trying to develop everything really fast, and you don't have enough time to rethink about what you're doing. If there is a possibility to deliver the same value for somebody else, because a lot of customers learned that the software or the IT industry is really flexible and allows you to create almost everything. So you are just producing whatever want you add to the business application. We are missing this, we are missing that. So the IT companies, and when I had a discussion with the system integrators there, they have like a huge backlog of requests that they should cover, because the customer is waiting and they don't have enough time to care about what they really did. So it is like a chicken egg problem, that you delivered something, but you don't have enough time to maybe take care about it, to maybe provide it to somebody else. And it is.
So I mean, I think that being able to showcase like the platform can do these amazingly cool things, it's great, and it's the art of the possible. And Power Platform is special in that respect, because there are so many extensibility points, not just in the user interface, like throughout the whole core of everything, back end, the integration points, plugins, there's so many different places that you can extend. And that's what's so good about it, is that if you do get to the point where there is a real value in providing that extra functionality, then that's where you can do it. I mean, Microsoft, we also often talk about like no cliffs. Like you never get to a point where you're can't get across a certain big gap, because you're always going to be able to bridge it and with pro code. But being able to get as far as you can with low code, and I think that's when you're demoing, and because PCF demos so well, right? But that is the tip of the iceberg, because you're not really looking at anything below. So it's great to demo with PCF, but as long as it's very clear about the actual the total cost of ownership and why you would use one versus why you wouldn't use one, and saying, look, this is how far you can get with using low code. And I think what's very important point, especially because we were talking about model-driven apps, the model-driven apps, the amount you can do out of the box, with low code is getting more and more. If we look back sort of 5 years to 6 years when PCS was first introduced, the number of things you could do out of the box was much lower. That we didn't have things like the form component, that you can show the form of a related record and then even edit that form. You couldn't do the sort of some of the really cool things in grids, like editable grids and grouping and sorting and in Canvas apps, again, more recently we've got the modern controls that should kind of have a much more sort of like look much closer to the standard Microsoft Fluent pattern, and so there's so much development in the platform that even if previously you might have needed to use a PCF, then now you may not need to. So I think that is the philosophical kind of conversation that we should always have whenever we're talking about this thing. And you're absolutely right. It's broader than just Power Apps. It is software development across. It is the core of software development, no matter whether or not it's low code or pro code. Because if you're doing something with pro code, you have exactly the same kind of conversations about like, well, we could build this just using Material UI or Fluent UI or and whatever framework we're using for the back end. Okay, but we need this very specific user interface for this. Then, well, okay, we're going to have to branch out and do something a bit more bespoke. So it's exactly the same conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm really glad you mentioned the low code, because I am a typical representative of a citizen development. Like my background, it is technical on like a high level, because I used to do the envisioning and all that kind of stuff, but I was never like system engineer developer. And for me, because in most cases when we discuss components, it's really heavy technical stuff. You hear people, maybe leaders like you or Diana Birkelbach from Orbis, like when she talks about the PCFs, for me it's a science. But on the other hand, many of the arguments that we use was like, there's a better TCO, there's better efficiency, you'll be able to do a lot more, etc., etc. But for me as a citizen developer, it means I am able to do something that's way more complex than I'm capable of. So it's not just a time saving for pro coder, it's not a time saving for these highly skilled guys with a rich experience like you. For me, it's being able to actually deliver something that's way more cool than my CV is able to provide, which I think is a fantastic thing about the PCFs, especially now that we see these galleries. Because if I create something, I really want it to be used, right? I want to be able to use applications for on an enterprise grade level, right? I don't want to use something that I'm going to just, show someone that I built this myself. Yeah. You won't believe it, and I'm going to just hide it somewhere. I want to use it. I want to, build it to be used, and that's why components that have covered this below the water part of iceberg are really cool for me.
Yes, exactly, and I think that this low-code approach just underline the potential of reusability of something, because if you have like an entire environment of people who are able to reuse something what was already developed, then it makes sense to take care about what was developed, right? Okay, so that was about the second thought of this part. We are now bringing the topic to the PCF controls in real life. And I want to start this discussion about, like, when I was doing a research about which components are mostly used in the business applications, I take a look on, for example, the PCF gallery. I was searching on the various sources of the business applications that are not only developed on the Power Platform. Like all of them, they are solving the same topics, like activity management, task management, also scheduling events, working with the data and uploading files. So there are some common topics that should be somehow solved, and it is like the first way how you will solve it on the Power Platform is to use the PCF control. Of course, there are some solutions already available, but already there are some pieces of the code available on the internet that you can reuse. So in each case, if you identify the use case, and we also mentioned it before, you know what is your initial topic that you need to solve. I need to solve file uploading. So there should be, for example, use case. If the opportunity in my business application reach, especially the stage, I don't know, agreement signed, there should be the agreement uploaded to the CRM. So we need to solve it somehow, and you need to solve the problem that there should be the task that tells you you should upload the agreements. You should have the special storage where it will be stored. Maybe you have the SharePoint integration where you would like to store the agreement because you have the particular folder for each opportunity, and so on and so on. And from the simple use case, which is the file upload, you need to cover a lot of use cases like sharing, where it will be stored, which types of suffixes you would like to allow user to upload. You would like to also define what will be the maximum size, for example, to restrict the size of the file. And then you are initializing the complex component that should solve a lot of use cases. Yes, it is only the file upload, but with many use cases that should be, not only use cases, but also edge cases that should be covered within the PCF component. So we just sum up a couple of topics that should be solved when you are taking care about the PCF control. And for sure, you need to cover the component, how it look like, meaning the visual representation and the visual logic of the PCF component, how it will look like when it sits on the form. The second point is that you need to bind it to this particular data. And as we know, there are various ways how to do it. And we know that there are some limitations about how to configure the components. In the Power Platform, you have things like quick views, you have views that represents filters, you have data binding to the particular entity. This is all what you need to care if you are developing the component, especially if you want to reuse it. So it means that you have various ways how to connect the particular component, with the data structure that you have in your model-driven application. For sure, you need to solve all events that can happen during the operating with the component and the form. So it should be responsive, it should be functional, and interact accordingly to the behavior of the user. And for sure, you need to have the context awareness, so the component is connected with the other parts of the form, with other parts of the application, and it should behave depending of the context of the entire form or the application. For informing the user what is happening with components, data, or the data manipulation, you need to inform the user what is happening if something is wrong, if data are not correct, or there are some conditions that are not met within the operating with the data through the component. And we can cover it into testing and debugging and documenting of the PCF control, because as we know, there are many ways how to do things. So it means there are many ways how to make things bad and provide worst results. So it makes sense to take a look on it if it works fine, and especially to take care about the performance, especially if you're doing these hacks within model-driven components and packing the web components into the model-driven component. So there are many things that should be covered, and they are under this top of the iceberg that should be covered.
Yeah.
And I like how Scott described the complexity that should be handled, because if you don't have allocated time to care about the component, then there is a higher risk that the component will not work. In, for example, latest version of the Power Platform, you need to care about the performance, the behavior, how a component look like. It should be compatible with the Fluent design that is used, and upgraded versions of the Fluent design in the future, and other stuff.
Okay, so I mean, while we're in this area, like, the point is there's more than meets the eye, right? So I mean, there are many things you have to think about. Scott, like two of us with this slide, with this, you know, prepared notes, results of our research, that was the safe stuff. Like, we asked people, we learned something, so it's easy to be smart now. From your experience, you definitely had discussions with many partners or overall companies that try to do something and they hit these roadblocks. Like, they didn't think of any of these points. Can you remember any of the occurrence, any of the situation when they came to you asking for help, like, we're working on something and now it doesn't work? What did we miss?
Yeah, I think this is the thing, is that this is why sessions like this are so important for educating oneself of the things that you need to ask, the questions you need to ask early on. And I think that's the key, is that if you're working on a project and you're going to start to use a PCF, then whether or not you're using a ISV like yourselves, or like a partner, or even an internal development team, these are the questions that you need to ask those people. It's like, what have you done to make sure that, to take that last point you were talking about, the testing, debugging, you know, and performance, what have you done to make sure that, okay, it works in development where we've got 10 test records, but how many records do we have in production? Oh, we've got 10,000 records. Yeah. Well, how's it going to work for that? You know, do I ever want to see a view where I've got 10,000 records that's going to be shown in this map, or this drag and drop thing, or this whatever list we're showing? And those are the questions you need to ask, because if you're not asking those questions, then you will get to a point where it goes into production and those things are going to start to cause problems, and it's a risk, as like you said earlier. And yeah, I've worked with many people trying to work through those. Sometimes the questions get asked, luckily, early on in the cycle, and we can deal with them before. And then sometimes it's more urgent because a project's gone live, and people will come to me and say, oh, well, okay, how do we make this work with 10,000 records? And
I think it's always only view where you can peacefully accept seeing thousands of records is probably your Outlook inbox, and everything else is unacceptable, I would say. Let's go directly. These ones also will be asking about Scott's experience Scott, which are the
You
top
snuck
components?
this question in, didn't you? You snuck this one in. It's like, you just trying to put me on the spot here, aren't you? Yes, my top 3 components. I mean, I like that list of
way more exposure than we do. So I mean, we're trying to figure out. We can Google so much. We have all the Google Analytics. We love our friend Guido from PCF Gallery, but still, Scott always knows more. So that's why I put you on the spot.
Well, I mean, it's funny because as I was mentioning earlier, I think this changes over time, because like if I was answering this question, 5 years ago, or even like a short number of years ago, just that a lot of the top 3 components we would see would be about visualizing data from different tables on a form. So like a related records, or so PCF to show like a sub form, but then now the platform does that in model driven apps. You can do that out of the box. You don't need that. Or another one would be like editable grids. So I used to do tons and tons of PCF components, like editable grids, being able to edit in line. And now, of course, there's the editable grid that allows you to do that out of the box. So it is changing. In your list earlier, that one of I think the top one was like address validation. Big topic. A lot of people have a need. And if you go to the PCF gallery, you'll see a lot of, probably, I don't know, maybe the most common is address validation and map visualization on maps as well, because these are the things that it's like, if you're talking about like the use case, pretty much every business has got some kind of use case for showing addresses and maps, and so naturally they're going to be very common. The other things is like visualization of being able to edit many-to-many relationships, or one-to-many relationships as a inline field rather than as a subgrid, because in model-driven apps that's quite a you have a subgrid and you have to add records to a subgrid, and sometimes it's not as efficient if you're doing that over and over and over again many times a day. You want to have a more of an efficient use case. And in Canvas apps, probably, I mean, the drag and drop component that I built a couple of years ago is hugely popular. So many people use that because it's not something you can do out of the box. There's no drag and drop functionality native. So that's a very big, very popular. So those would be my the things I see the most of. Now with the modern controls in Canvas apps, again, there's less need, because I built with the PowerCat team the creator kit, which was creating like Fluent, the Microsoft standard Fluent user interface style, a lot of components. So there was like a grid there was some icon buttons and things like that, and so they were very popular. But now, of course, we've got the modern controls in Canvas apps, which are kind of set to replace those over time. So it's a moving target.
Yeah, great.
All right, thank you very much. I think that we really like talking to each other because the time is moving fast. Let's jump to section number 4, advanced techniques in PCF development. And that's once again on you, sir.
Yeah, so if someone can make me a presenter, and then I can just share my screen.
Yeah, I'll make you presenter now, Scott.
Thanks so much. Yeah, because it's definitely well, obviously I could talk for a very long time in this. I could go through this and I in fact I have done entire workshops, multiple day workshops on PCF, but I just picked out like 3 here really, which I just wanted to kind of go through very quickly. And it's more, we're not going to go into some massively down into details, but it's more just to sort of give you an idea of some of the things if you're going to develop PCF controls yourself, some of the things to be aware of, but also if you're working with other people, with development teams or partners or ISVs, these are some of the things that you might be interested in knowing about as well. So the first one is enabling PCF controls in Canvas apps via Pack CLI. So what do I mean by that? So inside, this is the PPAC, the Power Apps, the Power Platform Admin Center. And if you go into an environment and you come down to settings, there is this little section here, which is like Power App Component Frameworks for Canvas apps. And without this, without toggling this on and saving, you won't be able to use PCF controls inside Canvas apps, or you won't be able to import them even. So any Canvas apps, it will just remove them from your Canvas app. So if we go into if we open up a Canvas app here and we just edit this, what you do get is you get a little warning. It kind of it's sort of like a skull and crossbones, really, but some people kind of get worried about it. But and the reason that you have to enable this is because you see there it says this app may contain unsafe code, because it's loading somebody else's code. Okay, so and this is the power of PCF, is that you are loading somebody else's code so that it's now going to run natively inside Power Platform, and therefore there needs to be a degree of understanding of what you're doing there, which hence why this it's off by default, and it just gives you this warning. Now, you don't get this warning at runtime, you don't get this warning when your actual users are using it. It just tells you about it if you're actually editing an app. Now, it's kind of a bit annoying if you have to go into the settings on everything. So the great thing is that you can install the Power Platform tools inside VS Code, which is the IDE, an IDE for developing, and you can then use something called pack. So it's pack env, and you can use this setting here, which is update settings, and then you can give the name is custom controls in Canvas apps enabled, and you give it true, and that will just simply enable that much easier. So you could make this like an automated script to do that for a new environment. So that's the first one. It's just like a really easy thing, but it's it's important to know that you do have to enable these things, and you won't be able to import them into you won't even see the tab to import them. Second one is something called virtual PCF controls, and I'll mention this later on just in a minute in the news. But what this means is, and this is like a different way to the PCF controls were originally. Originally, if you wanted to use something like React or Fluent, which React is a user interface framework, or at least a way of building user interfaces quickly without having to do very complicated browser HTML DOM manipulation. And Fluent is a library that runs, is built by Microsoft, that runs in React, which is basically used by all Microsoft products. And so indeed, it's also used by Power Platform. So model-driven apps is built on the Fluent UI, and Canvas apps is built on Fluent UI. The modern controls inside Canvas apps are Fluent UI. And previously, if you wanted to do that, you had to kind of bundle these things inside your component. So you have a copy of Fluent and React in every single component. That meant it was quite slow because you had to load those up every single time, and if you had multiple different components, they'd all have their own versions. And not only that, when you're React, you'd actually have your own React DOM instance per control. Whereas virtual controls, what it's done is it shares these libraries. So they're loaded once because they're part of the platform anyway, and each code component reuses that React and the Fluent libraries. So the size of the component is smaller, it's quicker to load, but also because it's not creating an instance of React every single time your component is rendered, that makes it so much more performant. It's a considerable increase in speed. So it's a big deal. And so you can reuse the shared libraries. When you are creating your PCF controls, there is a framework parameter that you can use that automatically scaffolds it to make it easier to create. And rather than returning HTML from your component, which is like the old way of doing it, this way you would return a React component, and so it makes it much more modern way of working. And then the great thing is that the rendering of it is so much easier. So normally what happens is that you would previously create an HTML div, and that would be passed to your component, and then you'd be responsible for putting in your HTML into that, and then you would kind of raise events. But now what happens is that when you initialize your component, it gets called, update view gets called, and what you do is you return a React component, which might have an HTML button or whatever. And when you click that button, it goes through in this little kind of internal React rendering cycle. So you don't ever have to go, you don't have to keep going back out to Power Apps. So it's a lot more efficient because it's all happening internally inside that. But if something does happen internally that you do need to tell Power Apps about, so maybe you've updated a value or something like that, then you can call the notify output change to tell Power Apps that something's changed, and then it will go and ask for the information that's been updated. So that's virtual controls. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is more of an advanced type technique, is more about data binding. And you did mention it earlier about data binding. And by natively, when you put controls inside Power Apps, model-driven apps, Power Pages, the data binding is handled for you. And this is the great thing about PCF, is that it does all the heavy lifting for you. It manages the moving data back and forwards between Dataverse or indeed other connectors, you know, like maybe an Outlook connector or whatever, if you're using it in Canvas apps. And so that the framework is doing that two-way data binding and pushing it back and forwards between your PCF control. But there is a more advanced way of doing that, which is basically calling the web API inside Dataverse using the framework that it's given. And that means that you're completely in control of how you get that data and how you update that data. Now, so if you've got an application that has got performance is really, really important, you want to be very, very clear about how you get data and how you update data, then the web API then gives you this ability. So that's like an advanced way. But of course, as soon as you do that, you do lose a lot of the benefits of that two-way data binding, which is built in. And there's exactly the same thing happens with Power Pages as well. So you can, by default, Power Pages handles all of the data that's been given to your PCF control via the forms and views inside Power Pages. Or you've got Liquid as well. Liquid is a templating language that can get that data and give it to your PCF control. So again, you don't need to worry about how that data is given to you or how you're updating it. But again, if you do need that ultimate control, you can call the web API and do CRUD, create, read, use, update, delete. Or indeed, you can actually invoke a Cloudflow as well to do sort of more complex stuff if maybe you want to integrate with an external connector. So that's kind of something to be aware of when you're building PCF controls, or if you are using someone else's PCF control, you know, asking, well, how is this working? Do you use data binding or does it use the web API? So latest news then quickly. You kind of have like a jingle, you know, latest news. So I was mentioning virtual controls, and really the reason I mentioned it earlier is that virtual controls now are general availability. So they are actually now, previously they'd been preview, and they've been preview for a very long time. All the Microsoft controls were virtual controls. Many different controls built by other people were virtual controls, but it wasn't actually theoretically, technically supported in production, even though really in theory it was. But now it's officially supported. So the updates have been made. And what that means is that the controls are that you can now build and use in production will be if there is any platform changes or anything like libraries changed, then Microsoft will kind of make sure it's always backward compatible, etc. So that's the first one. And then Fluent version 9. So Fluent version 9 is the sort of, you might have noticed over the years, certainly over the last year, that the user interface is subtly different. It has, maybe if you compare model-driven apps, or if you compare the Creator Kit controls with the new modern controls, you might notice that sort of the new controls are sort of a bit more rounded, a bit more kind of, bit more sort of organic, and that's because Fluent version 9, and that's what's happening there. And so what's happened is that there is a increased support for the Fluent library. So if this is the knowledge base article, the Learn article on virtual React controls, and so if you scroll down here, it does give you a list of this is how you specify which version of React you want and which version of Fluent you want. And if you come down here, you can see that this is the version that's actually you can ask for, and this is the actual version that's loaded, which has been updated. Notice that it's actually version 17 in model, and then the version you can actually ask for version 8 of Fluent, or you can ask for version 9. So yeah, so that's part of the announcement, that which means that now you can build PCF controls using this more nicer, organic Fluent 9 user interface, and make sure that it looks similar to the native controls which are all moving to version 9 as well. So then lastly, little news, PCF controls in Power Pages. So one of the things that is nice about PCF controls is you can build a control and then you can use it in different places. Now, of course, there's going to be different use cases, right? So model-driven apps, user interface is going to be different to Canvas apps, it's going to do Power Pages. So although you can build one control that's used across those 3 different platforms, it's quite challenging to find the use case that matches all 3. Also, it's quite challenging in terms of how you code it. But nevertheless, you can add controls into a form. So if I quickly show, so this is a view of this is a sample application that in advocacy we use, and if I open up one of these, then what this is doing is this is one of the nice things about Power Pages, is that you can define your forms and your views using model-driven views in Power Pages. You can use custom templates and stuff like that as well, or even indeed React user interfaces. But well, it's very quick to build a website that accesses your data and make it read only, or even you can make it full read-write access. But what we can see here is I've got a model-driven form, and actually I'm rendering a multi-select choices list here as a set of checkboxes, rather than as just previously it would be like a comma separated list. So this is a PCF control, and it's actually a virtual React PCF control as well, which is at the moment in the same state as it used to be, so it's not fully supported, but I expect at some point that will be supported. And here as well, we've got another control here showing images, and again, this is a PCF control. So you can now add in PCF. You can have PCF controls in your forms, in your Power Pages forms, and they will render on the web. So yeah, that's the end of the latest news for me.
Perfect. Cool. Yeah, so thank you, Michael, Scott, and Jacob, for a great presentation. So we'll now get into questions and answers part. Should you wish to ask a question, please feel free to type in the questions box now. So our first question is, do we have these examples anywhere for people to explore in GitHub or someplace so we can see how PCF is used in it?
So the question I think was about is there any GitHub sources for PCF? And so if you do go to PCF Gallery, PCF.gallery, most of the controls there have links to the GitHub repos that they've come from. And if anything, even though you obviously the tip of the iceberg story is very important for open source controls, especially because a lot of the times there isn't any support that's given by PCF controls, PCF Gallery. Nevertheless, it's a great way to learn. So you can go and you can look at the code. So that the drag and drop component that I mentioned earlier that I built, which is very popular, you can go and see the GitHub repository for that, and you can kind of see how I built it and reuse their code, in an open source way.
Perfect. So just the next question there is, do PCF controls work in any kind of walled garden? And if not, what is the best way to prove to the security department the control I develop is safe?
Well, I think the same would go for any software. I think that's the key. Any software that you use from an external source, you have to go through due diligence, right? And the same applies for PCF. So I don't think there's any special considerations, because if you're going to use an open source control, then, well, you can go and look at the source code, and then you can go through the same level of auditing that you would do for anything else any other third-party component you were going to use. If you're going to use one of the awesome controls by Resco, then obviously you're entering into a contract to support a contract with Resco, and obviously the same due diligence would apply as if you were using any other service from any company.
Yeah, that was by the way really good questions, because we had a couple of a couple of slides regarding the components that we have. And Sean, maybe that's a question. If we can go through a couple of slides that we still have remaining about the components that we are developing in Resco. Do you have time for that?
Yeah, of course. It's all up to you, whatever you want to do. If you want to show some slides.
If you could switch to me.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So we didn't mean to interrupt the question part. It's just to properly end the plan content. So covering, I mean, in each and every section we discuss here with Scott, we try to really introduce the idea of Resco being the new member of the PCF community, allowing this magic to really have impact in an enterprise grade world. So what we can say about the Resco and the PCF, Scott, you mentioned it a couple of times that we already have some offering. We are doing some extra work. We're doing some extra mile. That's the term to be used in the corporate world. But just to introduce properly what Resco is actually doing, yes, there is this whole PCF initiative, but it came from somewhere. Resco is mostly known for something else, I would say, or that's the perception that it is something else. Resco originally, built its legacy on a mobile client for D365 for field service and for sales. So we have a long history of D365 projects where we provided the first mobile client there was. So when the field service was introduced in 2016, you had the field service mobile up there. That was Resco's application. We were in partnership with the Microsoft. They were using our app. So this is what we're known for. This was biggest success. Like there were not many companies like Resco that worked with Microsoft this closely in the business applications area. So this is how we are known. That's why for some people it can be really maybe surprising where we are entering the PCF world. But just to give a bit more specifics to a legacy, we've been building mobile applications for a very long time. So we're pretty much a software house with a lot of the software experience. As you can see on the screen, what we built, our mobile client was just bunch of views and ability to search something. We mastered the offline. We mastered the offline business logic. We mastered the offline AI. We mastered offline DocuSign, all of that. But even though these pretty much define Resco for the last 10 years, it's important to say that PCFs actually are much closer to where Resco started 25 years ago. So we've been working on the components for developers from the very early stages of Resco. So pretty much, even though evolution of Resco took us from helping developers to actually having our own platform and our own mobile application, we're kind of going back thanks to Power Platform because they actually opened this new space where we can be actually helpful. So that informed the expansion within the Resco from just providing this mobile client, which was a result of the evolution of us knowing field service use cases in the microservice applications, not with the Power Platform. We're once again discovering our old knowledge, our old skills, and we're adding new portfolio to what we offer to the business application world. And you can understand it really as a Resco is now your resource for PCF controls if you really want to use them in enterprise-grade projects. So when there's money on the table, you cannot risk anything. It has to be secure. It has to be supported. Through all of the arguments, all of the discussions we had today about what are these nitty-gritty details you have to be really aware of, you have to be thinking about. So we're not just building the marketplace where you can actually get all of these supported PCFs, documented PCFs, ready for an enterprise-grade project, but also at the same time, we're doing direct private projects. So whatever partner or customer you are, you can reach us directly. You don't have to just search a marketplace and then be sad if you don't find what you're looking for. You can reach us directly. And also we have lots of collaboration. So if you provide a nomination, if you're the one person that comes to us with a nomination, and you want to collaborate on a PCF with us, you'll definitely get exclusive access. So we're just trying to give the community as much as possible. So that was pretty much, we're coming back to the slide that Scott already showed for a second. We are trying to be just helpful and use our old knowledge, our old skills. So if you want to extend, existing PCF that you already have, but you want to use it once again, or maybe upgrade it, change it, expand it a little bit more. Or if you need to build a PCF from scratch, you don't have resources, or you don't have a time, you don't have a knowledge, or if you found the open source PCF, but you need it for a really production, enterprise project, that's what the Resco is now for. That really inspired this whole collaboration. We wanted to inform public together with Scott about what are the things you have to think about, or what is the help you can get from Resco if you're really thinking about doing this custom development on Power Platform in this really new, smart, and cool way. So that was the part that we wanted to cover before we jump to questions. Now we can go back to questions if we have time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, we just have one more question, and it's just for Scott. So Scott, can existing PCF controls be converted to virtual, as per your YouTube video 2 years ago, or should one start new PCF and copy into custom TypeScript where needed from existing old PCF?
my YouTube video from 2 years ago. It's the same applies. So it really comes down to if your control is already using React, then yes, absolutely, because the way that you change, all you need to do is you need to just change the class that you're inheriting from, and then rather than rendering your React DOM into the div, the HTML div that it gives you, rather than doing the manual work of rendering your React control, you just simply return your React control, and then the framework does all of that for you. So if you're using React today, then it's very, very easy to change to using a virtual control. If you are using HTML DOM manipulation, then really that's about, you're going to have to rewrite it to use React, because then that's the only way that you're going to get all the benefits of using React and the virtual controls.
Perfect. So it just looks like that's everything. So on behalf of the ESBC community, we'd like to extend a big thank you to you again, Michael, Scott, and Jacob, for taking time out today to carry this webinar. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you very much for
Scott,
having
and
us.
also for the opportunity.
Perfect. So that's the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again for all of you for joining us today, and hope you join us again soon. Take care.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good luck.
Take care.
See you.
Bye-bye.